When it comes to wild food that supports wildlife, humans, and our ecosystem in general, there are few that come close to the mighty oak. In good years, which are known as masting years, oak trees can produce millions of calories per acre in delicious, nutty acorns. Acorns are an incredibly abundant food source in North America and around the world. This staple crop has been eaten by indigenous people in North America for thousands of years. Traditionally, they're leached of their tannins and then ground into a meal to use in porridge, soups, stews, and breads. Our favorite thing to do with acorns is leach them of their tannins, dry them, grind them into a flour, and use them to make acorn pancakes. According to the U.S. Forest Service, there are around 90 species of oak trees in North America. All of them produce edible acorns, but some are better for eating than others due to their lower levels of tannic acid and relatively larger size. And the reason you want larger acorns is pretty obvious. It's just that it takes less time to process them to get a usable amount of acorns. As for the levels of tannins in the acorns, this has a high impact on the edibility and the digestibility of acorns. High levels of tannins make acorns incredibly astringent, which is that sensation of your mouth puckering and you feel like all of the moisture has been sapped out of your mouth. What's actually happening is that the tannins are binding to receptors in your mouth and causing them to constrict, which makes it feel like everything's puckering. High levels of tannins in your body can actually reduce your ability to uptake nutrients and minerals from your food, so they're known as an anti-nutrient. Luckily, they're water soluble, so you can easily remove them from your acorns. While there are many species of oak tree in North America, all of them fall into one of two general botanical groupings that share some characteristics. These two groups are known as the white oak group and the red oak group. Oaks in the white oak group can be identified by their light gray, loose, scaly bark, but the easiest way to ID them is by their leaves. White oak leaves differ from red oak species because they have rounded lobes rather than pointy lobes. Their leaves are alternately arranged on the stems, and they usually get about 3 to 6 inches long, though in low light conditions they can sometimes be much larger. White oak acorns are oval and usually about 3/4 to an inch long. They're yellow and brown when they mature, and the good ones will easily slip away from their gray cap. White oak acorns germinate so easily that sometimes you'll find them starting to sprout when they're still hanging from the tree. Oaks in the red oak group have a darker, tighter bark pattern, and they tend to grow taller and straighter than the white oaks. Their leaves are lobed and pointy, and often the vein of the leaf will protrude out the end of the lobe. Their leaves are alternately arranged on the stem and usually over 6 inches long. Red oak acorns are often larger and more stout than white oak acorns. Ripe red oak acorns will pull away from their cap easily, and they're usually brown to copper in color. All species of acorns are edible after they're leached of their tannins, so this distinction is really just for informational purposes and it has no bearing on their edibility. Oak trees are found all over North America and around the world, with the exception of far northern regions like the Northern Canadian Territories and Alaska. The large trees can be found lining streets in suburban neighborhoods, providing shade in city parks, and forming the canopy of mature hardwood forests. Suburbs, city parks, and open fields are usually the best places to collect their acorns because in the forest they're a hot commodity among wild animals and they're quickly gobbled up by deer, squirrels, bears, turkeys, and more in the forest. Our favorite place to collect acorns is in the middle of a field in a local county park. Oak trees produce most of their acorns in the late summer and early fall. In order to overwhelm the animals that eat them and ensure that some of the seeds are able to produce offspring, oak trees use a technique called masting. It still isn't completely understood how the trees coordinate this effort, but every few years, oak trees of the same species all produce giant piles of acorns at the same time. Then they'll go a few years without producing much of a crop at all. The reason for masting events is the heavy predation from birds and mammals on acorns. If the trees produce a medium-sized crop every year, then the animals that eat acorns would be able to grow their populations up to a high enough level that they'd be able to eat all of the acorns that were produced every year. By turning on the tap full blast and then cutting it off the next year, the oak trees are able to keep these populations of acorn-eating mammals in check. Because of this variability, acorns can be an excellent staple crop for foragers in some years, and then the next year they might be pretty much absent. Harvesting acorns does not harm the trees in any way. Unless you somehow devise the technique to collect every single acorn that falls, in which case the trees would be unable to reproduce, and eventually this would wipe out their species. Barring this incredibly unlikely scenario, harvest as many acorns as you want, with the comforting knowledge that there's no way you'll get to them before all of the squirrels and blue jays get their share. Although most of the animals who reside in temperate forests eat acorns, I specifically mentioned squirrels and blue jays because they're some of the only species that actually plant acorns around the forest. Because of their habit of burying them to stash away for winter, and their other habit of being killed before they're able to retrieve them, squirrels and blue jays are actually responsible for planting a large number of the oak trees in the forest. Other mammals like deer, bears, and humans eat tons of acorns, but without stashing them away like squirrels and blue jays. But even knowing that the squirrels and blue jays are planting them, it's never a bad idea to plant a few acorns in a suitable spot. Oak trees are keystone species, which means that they're responsible for supporting the entire web of life in the ecosystems where they're present. Beyond their acorns, which are a primary calorie source for most of the large mammals and birds in the forest, their canopies actually host entire ecosystems of insects and birds. Additionally, their trunks provide habitat for moss, fungi, and lichens. Beneath the ground, oak roots are wrapped in fungi that store carbon from the air, produce edible mushrooms, and maintain healthy soil structure. Squirrels use their leaves to build their winter homes high up in the branches, and black bears often hibernate in cavities in the trunk of old, large oak trees. If you can't tell by now, oak trees are some of my favorite plants in the forest, and I think they really top the list for ecologically important species in this course. Ooh, look at this guy. Come here. Acorns can be preserved by allowing them to sit in a well-ventilated, cool, dark area to cure and dry out a little bit. Some of your acorns will inevitably rot or end up containing acorn weevils, but that's just the nature of wild food. Because acorns contain bitter tannins, they're unpleasant to eat in their raw state, and they're also potentially unhealthy to consume that way. Luckily, the tannins in acorns are water soluble, so you can remove them by either cold or hot water leaching. Hot water leaching is as simple as cooking your acorns in hot water and changing the water out over and over until there's no longer tannins leaching into the water. This method changes the texture a little bit and makes the resulting flour less useful for pancakes and other bready things, but some folks prefer hot leaching because they say it gives them more of a nutty flavor. We don't usually use this method because it takes so much energy and active time watching the stove and changing the water. Cold water leaching is a much more low effort method to remove the tannins, but it takes a lot longer than the hot water method. To speed up the process, first we grind our acorns into a slurry in our blender, which increases their surface area. Then we pour over some fresh water and let them soak overnight. We change out the water and stir them around every morning, usually for around a week, and then they no longer taste bitter and we know they're ready to go. This method retains the acorn starches, so the resulting flour is ideal for acorn pancakes or flatbreads. Now you might be rolling your eyes because I said that method was easier and then told you that it takes a week, but it really only takes about a minute of work every day of pouring the water off and changing it out to new water to leach the tannins.
Our favorite thing to make with acorns is acorn pancakes. And we're going to be using cold leached acorn flour. So these are acorns that we ground up, leached in water for several days until they weren't bitter anymore. And then we dehydrated that mixture, ground it up so it was a fine powder, and sifted out the flour from the more grainy bits that were left behind that we'll use for things like porridge. So what we have here is acorn flour, and I'm going to use a little bit of all-purpose flour as well in these pancakes. You could do it with just acorn flour, but they can be a little dense and crumbly, just lacking that gluten from all-purpose flour. So I'm doing a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 cups of acorn flour, 1 cup of all-purpose flour. So I just have 2 bowls here. I'm going to mix my dry ingredients in this large bowl and my wet ingredients, which is just eggs and milk, in this small bowl, and then we'll combine them together and fry them in a pan. Boom, pancakes. So I'm just combining the 2 cups of acorn flour with the 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. And then for my wet ingredients, I'm just going to add 2 eggs and 2 cups milk. Now I'm just gonna pour my wet ingredients into my dry ingredients and mix them up till they're just combined and there's no lumps left. Right, so our batter's all mixed up. It's definitely a bit thicker than like traditional pancake batter. So I'm just gonna smooth it out on the pan. You can absolutely add things like chocolate chips or nuts in here. We often, in the wintertime when we have hickory nuts and black walnuts, we'll put little pieces of those in the batter and it's really delicious. So we've got our skillet heated up over medium heat with just a neutral oil in it, and our batter is ready to go. So I'm just gonna plop it on the skillet. And then it'll take a few minutes before it's ready to flip to the other side. One telltale sign is you'll get all these little bubbles or craters forming on the top side of the batter. So we're cooked nicely on both sides, and we've got a beautiful pancake to go onto our plate with our first pancake, which, as everyone knows, is always the worst, so we didn't show that one. So we're gonna cover that up with our nice pancake. And something to keep in mind with acorn flour is it is naturally much darker than all-purpose flour, and it gets even darker when you cook it. So don't be afraid if your pancake comes out looking a deep, dark brown. It's not burnt, that's just the way the acorn flour looks once you cook it. I mean, it could be burnt, but it won't be as long as you flip it in time. Once we have a nice stack of steaming acorn pancakes, we love to drizzle them in honey or some kind of fruit preserve that we've got in the pantry. As I mentioned before, hickory nuts and black walnuts also make a great topping, and then it's time to dig in. Yum.